If all you see from your local government is continual disinvestment or a lack of resources, you get cynical about what's possible, and eventually you get cynical about the intentions.
We can see that they are supposed to shove. If they were to just shove at this exact moment, the shove would be shoved.
I do think that our cities could act if they chose to. I think it's just, I often see a weakness in leadership.
Like sometimes it's bigger than your coalition, right? Like making a permanent change, the likes of which like generations will enjoy.
Look around a city and you'll see a multitude of stories waiting to be told, but you might not realize just how complex and layered the explanation is. Join our motley cast of urban dwellers and planners as we research, question, and sometimes fall deep down a rabbit hole. I'm Ellen.
I'm Matt.
I'm Tess.
And I'm Zach.
And this is Multi-Story.
Welcome back, everybody, to part 3 of the Annecy story. We have had Tess show us many things about Annecy and the way that they are reconstructing their city to make it more walkable and person-friendly. And we're going to talk more about it now.
The final chapter.
Tess, what did I forget? Of how many chapters, Matt?
This is chapter 3, in fact. Part 3.
Great. Good. Okay. Nice work.
1, 2.
Anything that...
3.
Zach is here too, everybody. Go, Tess, go.
Okay, well, just as a little reminder, this is where we left off. This is Annecy, and we were talking about betrayal and sabotage.
That's just how Tess sets us up for things.
Bum, bum, bum.
And so I want to dig in a little bit more into the betrayal and sabotage, but as a quick recap, what we're talking about today is happening in the city of Annecy, a city in the French Alps, which happens to be my city of residence. And because its attractiveness as a tourist location and its growth as a city and its proximity to the mountains and the lake, all sorts of factors creating lots of traffic challenges, especially in the city center. And so as part of that, in the previous episodes, we talked about Annecy's new traffic circulation plan. And as a whirlwind tour of that, what they want to do is focus on removing car traffic from some of the residential areas and focusing it on external arterials. They want to eliminate cut-through traffic through the neighborhoods and sort of create these pockets where only local residents and services are accessing. They want to create a hierarchy of modes where there's a dedicated bike network, pedestrian network, and all of that is separated from the car traffic. And through these things, they want to make streets safer and more accessible, especially for those walking and biking. With the space they free up from these traffic modifications, they want to green the streets. They want cleaner air, less noise, more nature, and they also want to encourage social life and social connectivity within the neighborhoods. So all of these are sort of the goals of this connectivity plan. And in the first episode, I pitched to all of you that many of the challenges that the city of Annecy is facing in terms of traffic are similar to those that American suburbs were facing with the advent of the automobile, and that their response through this traffic plan is a similar type of response to these similar types of challenges. And that maybe what they are doing is actually undercutting many of the benefits of a connected grid street system that I know Matt and his fellow urbanists are very attached to. So in a way, what they're doing could be considered less direct and flexible, less resilient, less able to be expanded, and harder to understand for the people who use it. And I think basically you said to me that I sit on a throne of lies and that these two things are not the same thing at all. And that having
verbatim.
a street
Well done.
Yeah, that having a street hierarchy and restricting through traffic and having a more natural setting is not a bad thing in itself. The problem with American suburbs is car dependence and isolation and segregation of uses. And so the devil is in the details. And so in part 2, we looked at exactly what and how. We looked at what Annecy is doing and how they're responding to its streets very specifically, looked at those details. And we began with sort of Annecy's long history of dealing with the impacts of cars and traffic and parking in the city center. And we sort of talked about how even in some of its most famous and beloved pedestrian areas a few decades ago, those were places that were overwhelmed by cars. And in response to that, it's been a several decades process beginning in the 1970s where the city has responded to these traffic issues, begun to pedestrianize its streets, begun to look at traffic calming. And ultimately today, all of that is encompassing large parts of the city center in terms of streets that are pedestrianized or transit only or have significant portions dedicated to bike infrastructure.
I think we've said this in past episodes too, but I think there's this perception among American urbanists or European travelers that Europe is so idyllic and walkable because it was always that way, or the cities are pre-car. So it's really interesting to see that this city, like every other city in the United States, succumbed to the car like whole hog and then had the courage to realize that was a mistake and claw some of it back. That's pretty fascinating, actually.
Yeah, I think that's a big takeaway I had as I was exploring this, is that it just because Annecy is a 1,500-year-old city with a long history and a medieval city center doesn't mean that it didn't face the same challenges. And it isn't different today as a result of its different nature. It's different today because the people who lived there made different choices about how to respond to the challenges that cars were presenting for the city. However, if you were going to pedestrianize such a significant portion of the center of your city, that is going to have impacts on how traffic moves around. And Annecy is still facing traffic challenges in its city center, in part as a result of its growth, but also in part as a result of these intensive street modifications and pedestrianizations in the city center. And so in this part 2 of our exploration of Annecy, we looked at some of the specific things that the city of Annecy was doing with this circulation plan, like the details of how it was actually managing that traffic to create an environment where those sorts of safe and comfortable spaces were possible. And we also talked a little bit about this very intentional, very explicit goal, not just to relocate traffic to different streets, but through this effort to reduce the amount of traffic. It's a goal to strengthen other modes of transportation and reduce the amount of traffic in total because of the environmental benefits that can bring, because of the benefits to the neighborhood that can bring, because of all of the other, issues and nuisances and problems that traffic brings to the neighborhood. There is a goal that I think is kind of a third rail for policy in the United States, but an explicit goal to say we want fewer cars on the road. And we talked about some of the specific ways they're doing that. And even though the circulation plan is pretty ambitious and there's a lot of public attention on it, and it can be pretty far-reaching in terms of the impacts it has, in terms of what's actually happening on the ground, it's lots of these like little incremental interventions that together are having a collective impact. So there's a few places where the direction of the street is changing, or which direction you can turn at an intersection is changing. Maybe a street isn't a through street anymore. Some blocks are converted just to transit streets. There's a number of arterial streets where traffic is focused to, and there's this specific effort on greening the streets where space has been freed up. And as part of that, there's lots of programmatic pieces that go along with the implementation of this and the operation. So demonstration events to show how things can work before they're implemented permanently. There's a strategy of incremental changes where, like, at first the street is closed, and then later maybe there's some furnishings, and then later maybe it's repaved. So sort of piece by piece and gradually expanded over time.
Sneaking it in so that nobody notices.
Well, I think everyone notices. It's more about sort of a soft landing than a sneaky entry, right? Like this isn't so bad. We just put up some bollards. Okay, we're used to this. This is so bad. We put out some furniture. Okay, this seems to be okay. Yes. It'd be nice if we could repave this, and now we have a complete street, right? Pieces like signage, staff ambassadors out talking to drivers and handing out educational information when the changes were made. There's also these operational approaches related to soft access. So Deliveries are allowed at certain times of day, even though the street's normally closed. If you're an emergency vehicle or you need access to like a hotel or a local parking area, you can still get access. So it's not just a binary black and white, cars can access or cars can't. It's sort of a soft access that is managing cars to make the street more safe and more livable. And then in general, this idea that this is mostly being done with a modest cost. There's signage and paint in a few places where they have to install bollards, but it's not a capital intensive process, but it is a politically intensive process.
You said traffic was down, but that's just car traffic, right? Is there any sense of how many people are actually moving through this area and how available those people are to things like the storefronts? It seems like if people are walking and biking, it might be the same number, even greater numbers of people, and they might be more easily able to go into the shops there.
Yeah. Well, there's a few different ways to think about this, right? There is a body of research that says that people who walk and bike to retail are more likely to visit more often and more likely to spend more per visit when they do. That's part of this making the case for the value of pedestrianized streets. There's also, a component of destinations of opportunity. So sometimes when you're in a car, you're driving from your origin to your destination, and you're not stopping and looking at every place along the way. But as a pedestrian, you have the opportunity to go to these different destinations of opportunity, and you might visit more places than you otherwise would. You might visit places you didn't intend to visit when you set out on your journey. So there's like aggregate research about those types of things. We can say anecdotally that especially on some of these more established pedestrian streets, like there's so many people on them in the summer months that you can't see the pavement, right? Like far, far more people are on that street than would be able to be on that street if it was filled with cars. On the other hand, those are people who are looking for particular types of retail and services and dining, and the existing businesses who are auto-oriented and servicing may not necessarily see the same benefits from those changes in crowds. I will say too.
What are some examples of those? Like furniture stores or something? Like what?
Oil change.
What uses? Yeah, I mean, obviously, like literally
Auto
car
mechanic.
mechanics. Yeah, but I assume there weren't many
joke,
auto
but-
mechanics in the medieval center of Annecy.
Right. But maybe you have a restaurant that's focused on takeout or something like that. Suddenly, everything about your operations is more difficult. It's more difficult for your drivers to get in and out. It's more people. It's a hassle. Someone can't just drive in, pick up their meal,
It's
and
Matt's
drive.
favorite type of restaurant.
Drive
You're
off
also
again.
ruining your
Yeah.
city, so yeah.
Yeah. That's not like a automobile service thing. That's a dining option, but it's a dining option oriented towards a different type of operation that maybe works
Right.
less well on a pedestrian street. It just as an example. And there are others.
But also, I think like the audience that will have adapted to and enjoyed that type of service will be, I think, annoyed by the idea of instead of driving to the door of the restaurant, now you park, you have to get out and walk 2 blocks. You have to wait. You have to walk the 2 blocks back. Like it becomes a very mental hurdle to do something
Right.
differently.
And you can imagine things like a hotel valet's operations getting more complicated, or a health clinic's like ambulance service becoming more complicated, right? There's lots of legitimate uses in these zones that can be complicated by something like this. So last time we talked about how specifically Annecy was implementing this, and then I gave you sort of a quick preview of how it was being received.
Only being received well. Everybody says it's perfect. Nobody wants to rip any streets out.
Right.
That's
Well,
what I remember.
It began with some cautious curiosity and sort of moved into worry, and then anger, and then political opposition, merchant opposition.
You know you're making progress in your city when someone calls you a dictator. Let's be real.
Is this publication one of a particular slant, or is this like right down the middle the way that the media is covering this?
Well, we'll dig into this a little bit more. I have different kinds of sources coming at this from different directions, but I think the gist of it is we went from opposition to lawsuits to political challenges, and eventually to a pause on the project. And we are back to betrayal and sabotage. So that's a not so quick recap of what we talked about the last two times. And what I want to talk about today is, how did we get here? Like, how was this project possible, and how did it play out? Mostly politically. I do a lot of comparing between like how things work here in France and how they worked in the United States when I lived there. And there are a lot of things that are similar. And, you know, some things I think are just universally true for everyone around the world. But I do see some differences in terms of like how things work, like how projects get done, how cities operate. And it may be that some of those differences help to explain why Annecy is doing something like this, and maybe a city like Kansas City or another US city isn't able to do something like that. And these are anecdotal, but these are my impressions, having been very up close and personal with what's going on in these two very different places. So I would say my first impression in terms of things being different here in France is I was sort of surprised that here things happen. And that's sort of maybe that's a sad thing to say, but like you see a steady progress and there is an expectation of progress, which is very refreshing. And when I saw that and reflecting, it is kind of weird to see a city with like thousands of years of history sort of be less stuck than somewhere like Kansas City that's less than 200 years old.
Yeah.
And like not only
it's had to change, right? That's part of it, maybe. Like
that's where my brain went to. Like they've had 2,000 years of things having to change versus Kansas City's, like as the example, grew up with a car, and now we're trying to say no.
Maybe
versus. Okay.
I mean, Zach showed us some pretty great pre-automobile Kansas City scenes a few episodes ago. So that's one thing. It also seems like things here happen a little bit faster. And by that I mean like they will do a plan, and that process will be very similar to doing a plan in the United States. But like once it's made, then the plan is like carried out as a matter of course, right? And I feel like that's very much the exception in...
Yeah, here we're like, we've all agreed this is the best move for the future. Put that on the shelf and never forget that's how we want the future to look.
Someone else needs to go do it now. We planned it. We made 7 documents.
Yeah. And so, these are anecdotes and they're probably generalizations, but these are impressions I have as I sort of watch things happening. The other things I noticed is that like things here happen despite resistance. So often there's very similar headwinds against change. But whereas in Kansas City or maybe other US cities, those headwinds would like grind progress to a halt. Here, action happens like in spite of those headwinds.
Is it leadership or is it the process?
Excellent question, Zach. So
that's the only type of question Zach asks. Can we be clear? Like, like Zach doesn't ask stupid questions.
Right. So right. So what makes things different? So I think you're right. One of them is the process. There's a couple of other things too that are maybe cultural, right? Like it's a French pastime to complain about the administration. That's very much a thing, to just the bureaucracy, the administration. It's like asking someone about the weather. It's always a safe topic and everyone will just roll their eyes and talk about the impossibility of French bureaucracy. But at the same time, I do think, and I have noticed, that there is a cultural acceptance of government. Like there's this general consensus that it should exist and that its job is to improve the lives of its citizens. And I think that's just a much higher baseline and starting point than Kansas City. And that does make a difference, right? Like how much time and effort is expended on projects in Kansas City just trying to justify that it's worth doing something. And so
just being afraid of the one person that might blow it up. And then not only can the one person blow it up, but we can spend 5 years doing studies to try to circumvent the one person that could blow it up. to try to
And then they still blow.
to play defense, and it won't matter. Yeah, it's insane.
So maybe it's a little bit easier for things to move forward here because they're just starting a little bit further down the track. They don't have to exhaust all of their political capital and resources and energy convincing people that it's worth someone doing something. I also just think there's a certain like cultural collective level of empathy and like collective interests and I don't want to overstate it, right? Because I really do think people are people everywhere, but there are some cultural norms that make a difference. And I think there's just a different cultural expectation that it's everyone's job to take care of everyone that supports planning for the future or acceptance of change or acceptance of something that doesn't benefit me personally in a way that's much more challenging in a planning context in the United States.
America is the land of rugged individualism, right? Like where that, I guess it served us in certain crazy entrepreneurial ways or something, but generally, yes, it makes us really bad at living as a society.
So there's also some part of this that's related to resources. So just like the level of funding for projects and services means there's more capacity to be responsive. There's more taxes. That's just a thing. And so there's more resources that way. But also the cities are much denser and more compact, so services are more efficient. There's all sorts of ways that it's easier to do things and support things and fund things here than it is in the United States, where cities have all sorts of structural inefficiencies and deficiencies that mean they're never able to meet all of the needs they have, and they're always falling behind. And there's part of it that's just having the resources to do it. But then like the follow-up part is that there is a trust that the government has the capacity to do something. If all you see from your local government is continual disinvestment or a lack of resources, you get cynical about what's possible, and eventually you get cynical about the intentions. And so I think those are challenges in the U.S. planning context that maybe don't exist here too. So all of that is going on. But then finally, the part I want to spend the most time talking about today is I do think, Zach, there are some structural differences in municipal government that are driving some of this. And in Annecy in particular, it has kind of been a roller coaster. So I want to dig into that a little bit. So here, strap
Can I
yourself
add one
into
more theory before we move into the main theories? And that is one I've noticed in Kansas City, trying to advocate for what would be considered crazy, impossible things, is the lack of imagination. And there's no way to say this without sounding impossibly snobby, so I apologize. I'm really not a terrible person. But like,
it's never stopped you before.
Thank you. People from Annecy, by and large, have traveled. They've at least been around France, which has a diversity of places. And I feel like people in certain cities in the United States lack imagination that it could be different. Like it's just always been like this. And that if you disrupt the way it is, you just see breaking the old way instead of creating this exciting new way. And I feel like that lack of imagination is a huge challenge because people just can't see it and don't have a reference point for it.
I've talked to a few people in that exact way. They did have an opportunity to go to Europe and saw how cities were set up differently and wanted to bring it back to Kansas City. But then explaining the big picture took as much, if not more, effort than getting to the nuts and bolts of what they were envisioning.
Yeah, I think you guys are definitely onto something. There's a lot more leftover good stuff here to be experienced, and so more people are exposed to it. Because they're more exposed to it, it feels more normal, and because it feels more normal, it's not as threatening as a mode or a framework to move forward.
There's still a generation here too that, to your point about trusting government, their whole experience is when they entrusted government to make big changes, they demolished their neighborhood or ran an arterial down the middle of their neighborhood or whatever. I know people in Columbus Park here in Kansas City who were around when the freeway was built, and they just dead-ended the major previous through street into their block. And they're understandably distrustful now.
These aren't unfounded reservations, right? These are
Right.
these are places that have suffered and been traumatized by planning in all sorts of ways. And so the skepticism makes sense, definitely.
In my experience, the process is a huge part of it because we have this quasi judicial planning and zoning board that is staffed by mostly non experts, and applicants come before them. And the only people who ever show up from the public are people who are against whatever is being proposed. And to be fair and have the appearance of
Yep.
fairness, they always, make the developer or whoever is the applicant go and meet with the neighborhood residents and come back in a month. And this will happen 3 to 6 times, adding half a year to the timeline and to the budget. And then it's always, I think good cities have leadership that support their staff and will approve if you have staff recommendation of approval. But a lot of cities do not have that, and they will just kind of go with whoever's in the room at the time and whatever their feelings are. And that is not a good way to run a city. And so that's why a lot of American cities, you don't see anything happen. It's kind of that combo of a broken process and sometimes uneven leadership.
Yeah. And Zach, you and I have both been municipal planners. So I think you and I have experienced very firsthand the very numerous and significant failings of a US approach to municipal planning, right? And so I'm going to describe here something that works pretty differently, I think, and in a way that gets around many of the challenges that you described in a US planning context, but it also creates a whole nother suite of challenges that are different. And I'm really curious to see your reactions to it. So beginning with this is a list of the mayors of Annecy, which you don't really need to know. There's a few interesting things here, like almost every one of their mayors through 1983 was a World War II resistance fighter. I just kind of like the idea that they're like, yeah, if you're fighting Nazis, you can probably lead our city in general. But the other thing that is important here is that prior to the 2020 election, there was more than 60 continuous years of very stable, like center-right municipal leadership in Annecy. So it was, in terms of the political spectrum, like center-right, very stable. And you'll even see from 1954 until 2007, there was one guy, his son, and one of their deputy council your deputy mayors. Those are the only people who were mayor for that like 50-year period. Was like three
That's
people
a lot.
and two were related, right? So this is a very, very, very politically stable situation up until 2020.
Is this related to Francois? What's Francois done?
Do you just want to say Francois? Is that the...
It's the only French word I can say
Okay.
and know that I'm saying it right.
So the first thing that sort of upsets the apple cart is in 2017, Annecy, defying the odds in some ways, merges with 5 of its neighbors for reasons that aren't political, but are really related to like service efficiency and overlap and things like that. But there's this very complicated municipal merger where these 6 smaller cities merge into one larger city. And
Can I just point out for anybody who's an idiot like me that the blue part was the lake and
Yes.
not another province that I was supposed to pay attention to. Thank you.
Thank you.
That is all.
Yes, your understanding was locking.
Okay. So, what happens when you merge 6 different cities, all of their city councils combine? This is a Annecy City Council meeting where there are 202 city council people. And this was the situation from 2017 until 2020.
So, like, what's the average number of? You might be getting into this, so I apologize. But even if that's 6 municipalities combined, that's still ridiculously huge. Like,
Yes.
how many
Right.
constituents does each person have?
I'm glad you asked. The number of council people varies based on the size of the city. And so after Normally, a city of Annecy's size after the merger would have 55 council people. But because they were in between municipal elections for that period from 2017 to 2020, there were 202. So normally they would go down to 55 in the new election. But in the August before the election took place, there was a new law that said the number of municipal councilors cannot be less than 1/3 of the total number before. And since they had 202 divided by 3, that gives 67.3. They have to round up to a whole number, 68. That's an even number, so they add one more. So they actually are electing 69 council members in 2020. But if you think about it, the people in these areas are going from having 202 representatives to 69, and that is changing the political dynamics a little bit. Some of these cities were sort of like Annecy, were led by the center right. Others had a socialist municipal leadership and other things in between. So there was diversity in the political spectrum between these different cities, and now they're all getting mixed together.
So can I just summarize real fast to make sure I understood it? So like that law that you showed about like the number of people that you should have, that's 60 or 55, I think. Was that France saying that, or is that Annecy, or is that a province somewhere?
That's a rule for all cities in France except Paris, Lyon, and Marseille, which get their own special rules because they're special. So France is sitting there saying you only have to have 55. The merger meant that nobody loses their job. We now have 202. But then the new law says you don't have to shrink down to the 55. You can have what wound up being 69 elected officials for the new boundaries of Annecy. A very nice amount of council people. France municipal elections are very different than in the United States. And here's a few ways there's difference, and this will matter in terms of what's happening with the traffic plan. So voters don't select individual council people, they select lists. Basically, they're like party or coalition lists. And these lists that they select, on these lists, candidates are in order. So the more percentage of the vote that the list receives, the more number of people from that list become a council person, going in order from the person who's at the top of the list down to the bottom. There's also
so when you go in to vote, you kind of know who you're putting in charge and who the next people down would be?
Yes, you know the entire list for everyone who's competing in the election, and you can pick your favorite list.
Okay.
But you're
theoretically, if one party got 100% of the vote, their full list would be in.
Yes, I think so.
Sorry.
I
mean, it would not happen that way, but if for whatever reason they were to run and get all of them, their full list is in.
That's true. Generally, politicians and professional politicians are at the top of the list, and lower down the list, there's technical or advisory folks who round out the list, who know they're probably not going to end up being a council person, but are sort of part of the,
part of it.
Yeah, maybe, I don't know, maybe it's like a consolation prize. I don't know.
Okay.
So I think it's very interesting that it's mandated that the list must alternate between men and women. So this is a French law that mandates that there's an equal number of men and women in these.
It's got to be 50-50.
Yeah. And it doesn't exactly work out that way, but pretty close. There are 2 rounds unless there's an absolute majority in the first round. And you need to get at least 10% of the vote to continue to the second round. And if you are on a list that has more than 5% in the first round and your list does not continue to the second round, then members of your list can join other lists. So basically, between the first and second round, the folks that don't do as well sort of glob on to the front runners and then build these bigger coalitions and try to arrange themselves to get the most votes.
But is it that your whole list has to glob onto a whole list, or is it onesie-twosie people get to glob on?
It's a negotiated, you decide who gets added. Yeah.
So you can defect and say, make me secretary of green paint in your administration, and I'll come up with or whatever.
Or you can say, make me president of the urban area. Hold that thought.
And does this happen, in real time, or are we doing we have a primary and then we reconsolidate and have another primary and consolidate over time?
The 2 rounds are a few months apart, usually, or a few weeks apart at least.
This sounds chaotic.
Yeah.
Does it work?
Okay, well, hold your horses. It is.
I love it.
It is not only are these two rounds of elections with this list representation, it is a combination of proportional representation and majority bonus. So
You shut your mouth.
if you, I just saw a typo here. If you are the list that has more votes than any other list, you automatically get half of the council seats. That is your majority bonus. The second 50% of the seats are then allocated proportionally to everyone who at least got 5%, but also including the winning party. So automatically you get half the council, and then you get the largest proportion of the proportional half of the council, which means that whichever list comes in first automatically has at least 3 times the number of city councilors as the second place list, which is
that's what
yeah. So if you can have like a very narrow win and end up with like a very big mandate, right? And this creates some really complicated dynamics. So
was this system like developed all intentionally that way? Like someone sat down, like, we're going to write our approach to electing council, and they came up with that whole system? Or is this like bubblegum and baling wire, putting pieces together and slapping things onto it over time?
It has changed and evolved over time in a way that it seems like American democracy really doesn't. Like I think there's the 1930s are like the last time most cities changed up their the way their municipal government operates, right? Or something like that. Yeah, this is much more flexible and adaptive over time. What does this all mean in terms of what's happening in Annecy in 2020? So things that are making things outside the norm. One is that there's this merger and all the political dynamics have changed. The second is this right here, which is that one of the center-right parties chooses the existing mayor to head their list. And this other member of parliament, Frédérique Lardé, doesn't like that. She is left off the list entirely. And for reasons I don't know the backstory of, but I bet it's juicy. And so she's left off this list that her own party has created. And she ends up separating and creating her own coalition to run for mayor. So rather than backing out, she says, I'm going to run on my own anyway. I think I can be mayor and beat the incumbent mayor and beat the people who left me off the list of my own party. And this is the result in the first round. The incumbent mayor has 28.4%. The Green Party, Francois, has 27.9%, and the sort of rogue center-right candidate, her list has 21.5%. So she runs separately, and she comes in third.
Not bad.
And then COVID happens, and the second round of elections is delayed, much longer than it would have been delayed. And there, everything going on with COVID is also going on here, affecting turnout and campaigning and all the stuff, as you might imagine, as well as just opinions about what the government is doing about COVID, whether it's doing enough or it's doing too much, and all of that sort of drama. So that's happening.
And just to clarify, did that first election happen before like city shutdowns or like in the midst of all of that?
It happened in March. I mean, they were in the middle of it. I think the first one happened in mid-March, but they hadn't yet decided to cancel it. So yeah, there was already stuff going on in that first round. So with this extra time and this other stuff going on with COVID, this center-right candidate, rather than withdrawing or negotiating with their former party members, instead shockingly agrees to merge with the left-leaning Green Party and combine their lists. So now the Green Party that came in second has combined their list with this rogue center-right politician who came in third, and they are running against the incumbent mayor.
Is it a journalistic standard to make all the politician photos look very serious and unpleasant? Just as a side note.
Always. I was going to ask, so did she actually form a new party, or did she just say, I'm on the ticket? Like, because they identified her as XLREM or whatever her party had been versus her new party.
So that was her She went against her national party, of whom she was a member of the national parliament, I believe, to form a coalition with her and a group of political allies that joined the Green Coalition in Annecy. So there's not a perfect one-to-one between the national parties and the local parties. And this is an example where she was still a national politician for the center right, and in Annecy joined her local coalition to the Green Party's bid.
Okay.
And this is the result of the election. Now, remember what I said before about this majority bonus. In the second round, the Green Party wins by 27 votes. It's as narrow as you could over the incumbent. And you can see on the left, there was lots of Green Party municipal victories in this election. But with that 27-point victory, they end up with 51 of the 69 seats because they automatically get half, and then they have the largest part of the proportional part, and then they've joined their list to the third place person. So this, from a 27-point electoral win, they have 3/4 or so of
27
the
votes,
council
right?
seats.
So I can see where that might start to
With
feel
some individual votes.
27 votes, yeah, not points.
27 votes.
But
It's all a
individual
game, Zach.
people.
Yeah.
It's all made up. The points don't matter. That could start to feel super unfair if you're in the party that lost by 27 people, by 27 physical votes.
I mean, Ellen, can
And
I
now
introduce
you
you
are
to the United
outnumbered.
States Senate?
Oh my God, I don't. No, you cannot. But it's exactly. But like, I guess my point is like that goes from like losing the popular vote is a whole different matter, Matt. But it's like I guess a lot of times I think in Europe or in like ranked voting, it's kind of like this. It feels like you're gonna get a match to match percentage of representation versus now what you've got is this super stacked council.
Zach asked if there are structural differences. This is a structural difference, right? This is a system very much designed to avoid gridlock. But it does mean there is a potential to be very volatile, right? So large minorities can go underrepresented, but if you win the election, you have the people in decision-making roles to support your mandate. That 27 votes gave them plenty of seats and plenty of political capital and plenty of comfort to go do what they said they were going to do. So I think this is just a basic structural difference in local democracy that is one of the big reasons why more things happen here than they do in somewhere like Kansas City.
So is this new system since that you had the 50 years of basic stability? Because I would guess that this is a system then that yo-yos wildly between mandate, chase your priorities, electorate gets mad, throws you all out, new coalition comes in. But you said like for 50 years, it was like one guy and his son were basically the leadership for the city. Is this structure new with the new combining of the individual municipalities?
So basically, was this in place during all the stability, or was this new as of since 2020?
It's evolved over time. In general, it was in place in mostly this form in previous elections, but it was an election for a different geography with a different set of demographics. And it was elections where a leading popular local politician did it, she really Ross Perot'd this, right? Like she sort of, like the outcome very much would have been the incumbent mayor winning again if she hadn't played spoiler to this whole process. So that's part of what's going on here too.
And just to read what's in front of us, was the outside circle just like winners, non-winners, and then the inside circle is more of a division of who is represented within the majority.
Right. I mean, if it
opposition.
wasn't complicated enough for you, the outside circle is the winning majority and the opposition. And within the winning majority, there are many like sub-coalitions and groups.
Right.
So
Okay.
the
Can we give a shout out to the party that's calling themselves We on Sea? Because that's great.
Well, they're the ones who are the biggest advocates for the pedestrianization. So if you like that,
Then I like them even
then
more.
you like them. Yeah.
Say we to pedestrian. I can't even
And
say it.
even within, so this center-right politician went against her national party and against the incumbent mayor to join the Green Party and become part of their coalition. Then within her own rebel coalition, there was a breakaway and there was a rebel coalition, which is like the lilac color there. And you'll see in here other fracturing of the majority coalition as well.
So is this a turncoat operative? Is this the betrayal in your headline? Or is this she a brilliant operator?
I'm sure it depends on who you ask. What she got out of this was the presidency of the metropolitan area, basically. So she negotiated a leadership position that wasn't the mayor of Annecy, but was like the president of the region, which...
President to the president.
Yeah.
Assistant to the regional manager.
Assistant to the regional. Thank you for getting my joke.
Okay. So this is the political context in which the Green Party is moving forward with its mandate to pedestrianize streets and change traffic patterns. They have a large political majority that exists because they won a fluke election by 27 votes. And over the course of this, we talked about some of the challenges, but as we begin to look at this pedestrianization, there are a lot of problems. So there are merchant problems. At first, I think it's worth saying that the merchants were worried and opposed this even before it was implemented. So they in the sense that they kind of decided before it happened that it was going to be bad, and it's a little bit self-fulfilling in that way. But they were concerned before this circulation plan was deployed and the most recent pedestrianizations. By July 2024, the city is trying to throw events in these newly pedestrianized areas to keep them active. The merchants are organizing protests, and they're all putting symbolic for sale signs out on market days to communicate that the city's responsible for their business suffering. Demonstrations. By December 2024, they're submitting studies of their retail turnover showing that retail is down in their district after pedestrianization and demanding action. And you will see this is our rogue center-right politician who joined the leadership majority. She is expressing sympathy and pushing on the leadership to proceed more slowly or to reconsider some of these pedestrianizations. She's more or less sympathizing with the merchants and siding with the merchants that they have been negatively impacted by this and we should reconsider, right? So in addition to merchant problems, and these are sort of merchants too, we've got car problems. So there's lawsuits against the city about this pedestrianization that basically argue that restricting these areas from cars restricts people's freedom of movement, which is a basic right in society. The court decides against pedestrianization and describe it as removing the fundamental freedoms of movement, ignoring commerce and industry without any real consultation. This is the result of the lawsuit, which pleases the plaintiffs very much. But the remedy is simply that Annecy must declare this zone as a pedestrian area, which they promptly do. And so the pedestrianization project continues. But there's these constituencies and organizations that are formed around freedom of access and car access to these areas that are another set of headwinds on this process. And we talked a little bit about this last time. There's what I'm describing as equity problems too. There is arguments and oppositions to this, describing them as anti-poor. And you had asked in what way before. Essentially, they're saying that these pedestrianization projects and this traffic circulation plan are designed to support the privileged residents of the city center at the expense of everyone else. And these other folks have no choice but to drive where they need to go. They don't have places to park. They don't have alternatives to the automobile. Transit is insufficient. There aren't enough park and rides. And so these people are suffering. And more so, everywhere that the city wants to divert traffic, these surrounding arterial streets, those are where multifamily housing, social housing, affordable housing is located, and that's where the pollution would go. So they're saying basically these pedestrianization projects are just moving pollution from rich areas to poor areas, and in the process making it more difficult for less affluent people to move around the city, all for the benefit of a select few who live in the city center.
That's actually pretty compelling. Like, that's how we
Yeah.
located our freeways in the United States, right? Like, the people with the least power in their constituency got demolished. But I assume that this is not like, this is concern jacking, right? Like, they don't really care so much about the air quality around
That's the
poor
interesting thing. This is, I've pulled this from a blog from Les Annéciens, which are one of the opposition parties. And they don't really easily classify right or left, but they're very much classified as like no to everything. This is the anti-change party. And in the same way that someone will say there's nowhere to park as a way to oppose any development in their neighborhood in the United States that they don't like, I read this very much as just latching on. I think this is a cynical political move to try and undercut the majority from their left while they're also getting pressure from the right. I don't know how much these folks really care about air pollution and social housing areas.
How much have they posted about this in the past?
I don't want to project this onto them. I can just say my impression is that what is stable is that they are always opposed, and the reasons evolve. These are the folks that describe the people of Annecy as laboratory rats. They oppose to like starting this first in the city center instead of trying out in some other area, basically describing it as a radical experiment. And they also talk about these low emission
These are all
zones.
words that I would use if I was not trying to be inflammatory. That's true.
So at the same time, there's this other process where the city is restricting the types of vehicles that can enter the city center based on how polluting they are. And this is treated as another punishment of the poor. Someone who can't buy a new car with energy efficiency standards is now, prohibited from certain parts of the city based on these environmental rules. And this is another disproportionately impacting the poorer residents of the city for the benefit of the rich, right? Is the pitch they're making.
We see this in the US too, like the universe of people and their relative wealth is the car universe. So like, well, poor car owners, but like, we don't even, like, never mind the people that have to walk or choose to walk. Like, it's just like,
that was what bugs me about the people, like the lawsuit on the previous slide that was like, you have to, it's not fair to cars. You're like, basically you're discriminating against car users. We need to have the same amount of free access as everybody else. Therefore, give us all the access. Does not, like, their answer to someone saying that like pedestrians and cyclists should feel safe everywhere is like, well, cars should also feel safe everywhere. And it is unbalanced, and their solution is the problem that they're complaining about. So it bugs me because then that also, like, there are metaphors there about
a disingenuous
issues.
political argument. Ellen, this is the first time that's happened.
I know.
I will convey your thoughts duly.
Thank you.
Okay, so they have lawsuits, they have merchant problems, they have these different things going on, and so they begin to have process problems as well. You are a cowardly dictator, so there's just like straight up conflicts happening at the city council. Even the former mayor is like getting angry in meetings. The opposition says you're trampling on the opposition, a total denial of democracy, you're a cowardly dictator. And you can understand why someone who lost by 27 votes, the majority of the city, and opposes this project and finds themselves in no political position to move this forward, is sort of railing against this process as it happens.
Yeah.
And then
there's absolutely a psychological stuff at play here.
Yeah. And then in addition to like how decisions are getting made at council, there's also all sorts of details that continue to be a challenge. So edge cases or random scenarios, complex regulations like who gets to enter and when and how does it work in different situations that weren't considered. All of that is going on, creating process problems as well, which culminates in political problems. So it begins where a portion of the mayor's coalition decides that he's being too timid in implementing his plan, especially as this coalition arrived in precarious circumstances, and it's unclear how likely it will be they will be able to continue in the next municipal election. There's a lot of motivation to get things done that they want to do, and a group of his coalition separating and feeling like not enough is being done. Meanwhile, Frédéric Lardet, this rogue council person who helped the ruling party win, sort of becomes kingmaker, because without her votes now, he no longer has a majority. So suddenly the mayor must please the left part of his coalition and the right part of his coalition at the same time, because if he doesn't, he doesn't have a majority anymore. And in this context, the pedestrianization is postponed by 1 year. And it's postponed by 1 year last December. And that basically means that it's not coming back until the next election, which means it's not coming back unless the ruling coalition gets reelected, which means it might be done, right? And this is pretty dire because this ruling coalition has the capacity to do it now, sort of, and has decided to pause because of these pressures. This is where we get betrayal and sabotage. So the people who have advocated for this have basically said, you are not the you are not the leader that we were expected you to be, and they increasingly are breaking away from the mayor's group. Even more so, the president of the mayor's own political coalition says, maybe we'll have a primary next time. So the mayor's own allies are saying maybe the mayor won't continue. And then finally, this isn't about the circulation plan in particular, but it did sort of give you a clue. Frédéric Lardet, this sort of rogue center-right group, publicly critical of the mayor. This is just a few weeks ago, over the budget. And while she didn't vote against it, she very significantly did not vote in favor of the budget of the coalition of which she is a part. So beginning to put political space between her and the ruling coalition. So lots of problems going on with this, but there's another layer that I want to talk about. Obviously, this is in Annecy, as you can tell, because it's not in French. But what is happening in Annecy is not happening in a vacuum. These are ideas and strategies that are reflected in a lot of communities around Europe and North America. In some ways, the challenges that are happening in Annecy are tame compared to what's happening in other places.
It feels very everyday United States, Kansas City political process, the story you just told. It's like no courage to push through the inevitable backlash. Everything we've ever done in this city, people hated it until they loved it. And you just have to push through. And it kind of undermines, and I'm sure you're going there, like this idea that like things get done and they have the courage to push to the other side. I guess this remains to be seen.
Well, there's opposition and then there's opposition. But to sort of put this in context, around the time of COVID, Paris is sort of rebranding this idea of a 15-minute city, which is not a new idea. It's a very, very old idea, but the rebranding is new and sort of led by Paris. It's this idea, sorry for the link I left over the top of the diagram here, but it's this idea that you should be able to get to everything you need within a 15-minute walk of where you live. So you're like, neighborhood school is sort of the heart of the neighborhood, the services you need, the restaurants you want to go to, there's parks available. All of these things are within a 15-minute walk of you, and you have a complete community within a certain distance of where you are. And part of that is being safe from like busy regional traffic in this area, traffic calming, supporting walking and biking. It's sort of just this idea that wherever you live in your little bubble, you should be able to expect all of the stuff you need to live well. That's just a basic idea of a 15-minute city that is sort of rebranded in Paris and begins to expand to other places as a solution to climate change, as a response to COVID lockdowns, as a response to all sorts of urban challenges. It has a lot of potential and a lot of interest. So this is the city of Brussels. And I want to show this one because the maps are so similar to Annecy. So as part of their transportation, their circulation plan, you see that they're doing something very similar. They're dividing their city center into these different pockets. They're trying to organize traffic onto these external arterials, and they're trying to restrict the ability of traffic to move through the neighborhoods unless it's going into the neighborhood. So this is pretty much exactly what Ansi is doing. You see the focus on arterials is the same. The focus on these little pockets or pedals is the same. And on the map on the right, if you can see all these little arrows, this whole circulation plan process to change the direction of streets and change which ones are pedestrian or bus streets and things like that. This is all pretty much exactly what Ansi is doing, just on a little bit bigger scale. Here in Brussels, they call it like meshes, these meshes where regional traffic can't really penetrate or filter through, but local traffic can. A very similar motivation. Seems promising enough. But major problems in these cities, being accused of trying to gentrify these areas, anger at focusing on traffic when people have other needs. The pushback is so intense that it becomes violent. There are riots over this traffic circulation plan in Brussels. Police officers and firefighters injured, basically residents going out. Whenever these traffic calming installations go in, they're immediately torn out to the point where the city is not able to put them up again. There clashes in the streets. This is significant opposition to this circulation plan, which evolves from an opposition to a circulation plan to something more conspiratorial. In Oxford, there is an initiative for 15-minute cities, but they were also looking at traffic cameras to help manage the amount of single-use car traffic that was on certain roads to make things flow more smoothly for bus and other sorts of things, which have basically got turned into the government is trying to restrict where you can go in your neighborhood and restrict your freedom of movement, and is trying to create, basically ghettos from which you cannot escape, and use these 15-minute cities in order to implement this authoritarian vision. And these conspiracy theories spread around the world. Maybe Edmonton, Toronto, don't lock me in my neighborhood. Hysteria sweeps the UK. There are protests and arrests around these 15-minute city demonstrations around the world. So this is the global context of what Ansi's doing. They are also trying to restrict where the traffic can move. They are also trying to create these neighborhood pockets. They are also getting people complaining about freedom of movement or complaining about the efforts to restrict who can enter a neighborhood and who can use a neighborhood. So this is the context in which the city of Annecy is trying to move forward these processes. Having said all that, this is what a street a few blocks from me looks like today. They are out there pedestrianizing the street. They're building it. They dug it up. They're putting down the pavers. It's closed to traffic. And the last thing I want to show is this is just from 4 days ago. So 9% fewer traffic jams since 2022. The media, the local newspaper is very surprised to learn this. Not only are they surprised, they say in here, this is disconcerting and it deserves some analysis. And they're like, it's too soon to say this is because of the new traffic plan.
However, it wasn't
Really?
too soon to say that all of Apocalypse, before you even implemented it, was going to ruin everything.
They spent 2 years talking to people who said this would be the end of the world, this would cause traffic jams, that this would make it harder to move around the city. And now they have 2 years of data, the 2 years that this traffic plan has been implemented, showing that traffic congestion is reduced in these areas. And normally they're having trouble squaring that because Annecy's growing. There's more people, there's more tourists, there's more businesses. How can there be fewer traffic jams? It's a real head scratcher, right? So for all of the conspiracy theories, for all of the headwinds, for all of the political fallout, it probably will mean the end of the ruling coalition here in Annecy. They said they wanted to reduce the amount of traffic, and after 2 years, the amount of traffic is reduced. So that's my story of the traffic circulation plan in Annecy.
Sometimes you have to spend your capital into bankruptcy and get kicked out, but they were so close to pushing it through. Sometimes it's bigger than your coalition, right? Making a permanent change, the likes of which generations will enjoy, right? People were courageous in the past to create the Annecy that's the way it is now.
When is the election?
Yeah, spring of 2026. So we're exactly a year away.
Do you think that the reality of the situation will have time to percolate into people's consciousness and they'll say, oh, it worked?
One of the lessons we can definitely bring from the United States is that it's much harder to undo something that's done than it is to stop something before it's happened, right? Like, in a way, they've taken a stand by taking bulldozers out to the street and digging them up, right? Whoever wants to undo that, it can't just decide to undo it. They have to reinvest in going another direction after people have gotten used to it, after the people who enjoy it depend on it, after businesses have adapted and delivery routes have adapted and all of that sort of thing. So in a certain sense, I do feel like they have sort of put a stake in the ground here to hold tight through the politics that can come. They didn't achieve everything they set out to do, but they have done a lot in a short period of time. And I think it's hard for me to imagine someone coming in and saying, we're going to put things back the way they were.
Yeah, that you flip the status quo bias, right? Like if there's anti-change people, now you don't just have to defend the old way of the what's there, but affirmatively say that the old way was better and go through the effort of putting the old way back. Like it's a very different conversation.
But I do want to ask you all a question that I don't know I have a good answer to. I've described the quirk of these municipal elections and how the supermajority is formed from a very thin electoral win. This is a way to get around some of the challenges we face in U.S. planning, but it's also arguably less democratic. What do you think about this municipal government structure in terms of the benefits it brings and whether it's representative of what the people want?
I don't know that it's less democratic than, for instance, Kansas City's system, where we have a council of 12. The administrator of the city is the most powerful executive because we have a weak mayor system. Because, to your point, Tess, we are running a system that's afraid of corruption from the 1940s. But it's like very different because if my district is huge geographically, has a lot of different constituencies. Most of the time I don't feel super enfranchised. And it also creates like these big personalities, and it creates a lot less opportunity for courageous leadership because they have these huge huge constituencies to balance, basically have to react to all these negative reactions. I like it. I like doing things. I feel like we have a hard time doing things, and every time we do things, we've proven to be happy that we did them, and we should do more of them.
I think you can make a case that the democratic recourse is to vote them out, right? Like they were voted in, so they implement their mandate. If the mandate is not responsive, then someone else gets voted in, right? That is the democracy part of it. And in between, it's possible to do things. I think that's a case you could make.
Like that's what I like. It's like you run on the platform and you then like the system is set up to give you the authority to continue and not get immediately pushed back by because you only have a majority of like 51%. What I had expected you to explain was that the winning party gets the 50% and then the other 50% is split. But then when it's like, I do feel like they've over-indexed on the bonus to where they have so much of the voice that then it can very much feel like the dictatorship vibe because like there's not enough to, you have to, like the opposing opposition parties would have to work really hard to build within the majority if they wanted to even get up to 50%. So it feels a bit like if you had a party with malintent got in there, there's little to stop them. I think it's painted in a positive light to where it's like, you've elected them, you want them to do what's going on. I think we've seen politically, globally right now, there's a lot of bad actors. And what's the recourse for undoing something that you truly don't agree with? All of that to say, I think that's what the minority party feels like, even though it's obvious to us as urban, progressive, pedestrian people that that's ultimately a good thing for the city.
But this ruling party, if you will, is a moderated force because it is a result of a deal between two different parties that are not really adjacent to each other idealistically. So the fact that there's deal making and compromise is a moderating force in its own. And we saw in the way they were governed, I mean, that was kind of the reason there was a lack of courage, was that coalition was fragile. But I mean, we need more opportunities to make deals and create overlapping constituencies and things like that. We don't have that very well
I'm
in
not
the
sure what
United
I think
States.
about it.
I agree.
End of elaboration. Yeah, I mean, if it's a
Me
system that
neither.
empowers the
Yeah.
people who were voted in, what do you call them? Parties? What are these? The list of people, is it? I guess a coalition. The coalition is empowered to act.
I think it's a
That's a good
list from a
thing.
party.
I do think that our cities could act if they chose to. I think it's just I often see a weakness in leadership where they just don't act. They could act. There's nothing stopping them structurally from acting. I don't know why, but maybe a larger group of people that share the power puts the burden less on any particular person.
Well, you highlight something there. Here, there is no individual accountability, right? In the sense that if you vote in the majority, no one is going to say, you individual council person voted for this, so I'm going to vote you individual council person out. You are on a list, and how you get on that list is based on your political relationships that are unrelated to what a voter decides, right? So in a way, they're insulated. There is a collective accountability to the ruling coalition or group, but there's not a individual accountability to an individual person. No one has to go back and face their voters. They just go back and face their voters averaged among everyone else they voted with, which is a little bit different. Maybe
But that means that they run on policy, right? Instead of personality. It's like we have an idea, a bold idea that we want to sell
Right.
to.
And that is a big part of it. So these lists present platforms. They're like, if you elect our list, this is what our list is about, and this is our mandate, and this is what we're going to go do. And that's a lot of what we see in Annecy, right? Where maybe as in the U.S. is very, very much electing personalities, not platforms.
Or entrenched political
Baseball players.
dynastic families, or whatever. Yes, former baseball players. Exactly that.
So
Yeah.
at the very beginning, I tried to sell you on this as maybe an anti-urban idea, maybe not ideal. I've presented to you all sorts of challenges and reasons that people have opposed it. In the end, how do you feel about Annecy's traffic circulation plan?
I still feel good about it. I guess having, exactly zero stakes in the future of Annecy's circulation plan. But I do think, you definitely guided, you put us on a story for sure. You gave us a story. Ultimately, they're trying to, their reasons are correct, and they felt like they were, learning from past experience, right? They were trying to put it all together in a way that made sense for their city. And it does seem like they've just gotten stuck somewhere, which is probably the story for a lot of these projects.
Yeah, I think they moved it down the road, pardon the pun, towards progress, right? In the same way that the last generation pedestrianized the medieval center, and unquestionably now no one looks at that and was like, wow, we really need to bring cars back in here. This is bad for business, right? These are the types of things that take courage and vision and will inevitably have an unpopular reaction, but they are proven out over time. And so I remain bullish that the good will prevail against evil.
I think that's what frustrates me about this whole thing. It's like we have the data that show if you can pedestrianize a city, it will be there are so many knock-on benefits. And it's time and time again, even in a city like Annecy, they come back and say, yeah, but no. No thanks. They're the detractors that stop it. And I think that's why when you asked about the systems and do we agree with that or not, I think in my gut of guts or my heart of hearts, I want to think that I know that if they just shoved this through, it would be fine and accepted in 2 years. And we're kind of in this spot where we can see that they're supposed to shove. If they were to just shove at this exact moment, the shove would be shoved and it would be through, but they're not shoving. And so we're just frustrated. We're just on this kind of we're anticipating the shove, but we're also nervous that they're not gonna shove.
Well, yeah, I'm in favor of full gas, pedal to the metal, pedestrianization, to mix the metaphors similar to that. And what I would also like to see is wild construction on housing and adding more apartments, adding more density where we have these pedestrianized areas so that it doesn't become an equity issue and so that everybody can afford to live in these 15-minute cities. Because if it does become a situation where people are frozen out of the nice neighborhoods and these pedestrianization just seems to only benefit those who are wealthy enough to live there, I think that is a legitimate issue. So I think it has to be paired with construction of new housing as well.
I think you bring up a really good point. Obviously, how traffic moves around the city is one issue of many in the city, and it's even one issue of many in the mandate of this city government, which is a left leaning government with a lot of focus on social housing, affordable quality of life in general, issues with city services, all of which they also have to take care of. So it has to be together, right? It all has to work together so that it doesn't become that disparity that you were describing, Zach. To wrap it up, I would say that my experiential impression of what's going on is that the city has become more livable. It has become more welcoming. It has become a place that's easier to get to the things I need for me, shopping, services, that sort of thing. And it's also a place where it's easier to breathe and it's easier to feel safe when I'm crossing the street. And so on the whole, I can say for me, it has improved my quality of life. I hope that over time it can benefit everyone else in Annecy as well.
And as long as you want to be locked by the overlords into your little sector, then that's up to you.
Yeah, the only way out of your prison is to not drive in your car alone, which is impossible.
Seems like a very nice prison.